The galaxy was dying. Every star that still burned free seemed smaller than the day before, and every world that remained unconquered felt the shadow of death creeping closer. The Vorthak Empire had been spreading like a plague across the stars for over 1,000 years, and now they were close to finishing what they had started. Commander Vex Korath stood on the observation deck of Kepler Prime, watching the last refugee ships arrive from the outer worlds. His scaled hands gripped the metal railing as he counted the vessels limping into port. 12 ships. That was all that remained of the Draven system after the Vorthak had finished with it. 12 ships from a system that once held 3 billion souls. Korath was a Zephyrian, a proud warrior race that had fought the Empire for 300 years. His people were tall and strong, with green scales that could turn black when they felt rage. Right now, his scales were the darkest they had ever been, but it was not rage that colored them. It was despair. Behind him, the doors to the observation deck opened with a soft hiss. Dr. Lysa Brightmoon floated in, her pale blue form glowing faintly in the dim light. The Lumina were beings of pure energy who had learned to take solid form, and Lisa was one of their greatest scientists. She had been working without rest for weeks trying to find some weapon or technology that could stop the Vorthak advance. "Any word from the Outer Scouts?" she asked, her voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Korath did not turn around. "The same news as always. The Vorthak are coming. Their fleet grows larger each day while ours grows smaller. The planet killer. Omega will be ready soon." Lysa moved to stand beside him, her light casting strange shadows on the metal floor. "How long do we have?" 30 rotations, maybe less." Korath finally looked at her, and she could see the defeat in his yellow eyes. "I have fought them on 17 worlds, Lysa. I have watched them burn everything I ever cared about, and now they will burn this too." The planet killer Omega was the Vorthak's ultimate weapon, a massive construction the size of a small moon. It could drain the life from entire star systems, leaving nothing but empty space and dead rocks. The Coalition's spies had watched it being built for years, growing larger and more terrible with each passing month. Soon it would be complete, and when that happened, the last free worlds would die in a matter of days. Across the station, Admiral Thane Deepcurrent was having his own dark thoughts. The Nereid was in the command center, studying tactical displays that showed nothing but bad news. His blue-green skin had taken on the pale color that his people showed when they were deeply troubled. The Nereid were masters of space navigation and fleet tactics, but even their best strategies could not win against impossible odds. The final coalition had been formed 5 years ago when it became clear that no single race could stand against the Vorthak alone. The reptilian Zephyrians provided the warriors, the energy-based Lumina brought their advanced technology, and the aquatic Nereid coordinated their combined fleets. Dozens of other races had joined them, each bringing their own strengths to the alliance. But strength meant nothing when the enemy had already conquered half the galaxy. The Vorthak were like a swarm of mechanical insects, each ship part of a vast hive mind that could coordinate attacks across thousands of light years. Their biomechanical technology was unlike anything the Coalition had ever seen, growing and adapting like living creatures, but following the cold logic of machines. Deepcurrent looked at the reports from his scouts and felt his heart sink. The Vorthak had 3,000 ships heading toward Kepler Prime. The Coalition had maybe 400 vessels left in fighting condition, and most of those were damaged from previous battles. It would not even be a fair fight. In her laboratory deep inside the station, Dr. Brightmoon was working through the night, as she had for weeks. Ancient texts and star charts covered every surface, along with fragments of technology salvaged from dead worlds. She was looking for anything that might help, any forgotten weapon or lost knowledge that could turn the tide. Most of the other scientists had given up days ago. They had tried everything they could think of, from virus programs that might infect Vorthak systems to experimental weapons that could punch through their armor. Nothing worked. The enemy was simply too advanced, too numerous, and too well prepared. But Lisa kept searching through the old records, driven by something she could not quite name. Perhaps it was hope, Or perhaps it was just the refusal to sit quietly and wait for death. She pulled up another ancient star chart, this one dating back over 10,000 years to the early days of galactic exploration. There, in a forgotten corner of the map, she found something interesting. A small notation in the old tongue marking a system in the far spiral arm of the galaxy. The symbol next to it translated roughly to stubborn or persistent. Most explorers had ignored that region because it was so far from the galactic center. But something about the marking caught her attention. She ran the coordinates through the navigation computer and found that the system contained a small yellow star with several planets. One of them was marked as possibly habitable, though no one had ever bothered to visit it. The world was too far away and too isolated to be of any strategic value. But the notation intrigued her. Why would ancient explorers mark a distant world with the symbol for persistence? As she studied the charts, an idea began to form in her mind. It was desperate and probably foolish, but desperation was all they had left. She gathered up the star charts and hurried toward the command center. She found Commander Korath and Admiral Deepcurrent hunched over tactical displays, planning what they all knew would be their final battle. When she approached with the ancient charts, both warriors looked up with tired eyes. "I found something," she said, spreading the charts on the table. "An old reference to a world in the outer spiral arm. The coordinates suggest there might be a habitable planet there." Korath studied the markings with little interest. "We have no ships to spare for exploration, Lisa. If there are people on this world, they are too far away to help us." "But what if we could send them a message, Brambaudin?" she insisted. "What if there is someone out there who might hear our call for help?" Deepcurrent's tentacles moved in the gesture his people used for skepticism. Even if there were people on this distant world, what could they do? We are facing the most powerful force in galactic history. No single world could stand against the Vorthak. Lisa's glow grew brighter as her emotions rose. Maybe not. But maybe they would remember us. Maybe they would know that we tried to fight, that we did not surrender without a battle. The two military leaders exchanged glances. They had seen too much death and destruction to believe in miracle rescues from unknown worlds. But they also understood the need to do something, anything, rather than simply wait for the end. "What kind of message?" Korath asked finally. "Something simple. Something that explains who we are and what we face. A record of our existence, so that someone will know the final coalition fought with honor." Deepcurrent considered this for a long moment. It would take considerable power to send a signal that far. Power we need for our defenses. "The defenses will not save us," Lisa said quietly. "We all know this, but maybe a message to the unknown can give our deaths some meaning." After much discussion, they agreed to send the transmission. Lisa worked with the station's communication specialists to craft a message that could travel across the vast distance to the mysterious world. They encoded it with mathematical principles and star charts, hoping that any intelligence that received it would be able to understand. The message was simple and heartfelt. "We are the final coalition of free worlds. We have fought against the Vorthak Empire for many years, but we are losing. Soon we will be gone, and the galaxy will belong to those who see all life as something to be conquered or destroyed. We do not ask for help because we know none can come. We ask only that someone remember that we existed, that we tried to protect the right of all beings to live free. If you receive this message, know that we fought with honor until the end." The massive transmitter powered up to send the signal across 50,000 light-years of empty space. Dr. Brightmoon added one final line. "We are the last. We are dying. If anyone hears this, please remember that we tried." The message rocketed out into the void, traveling faster than light toward a small blue world that none of them had ever seen. As the transmission ended, Lisa felt a strange sense of peace. They had done something, even if it was only shouting into the darkness. None of them expected an answer. The distance was too great, the chances too small. They turned back to their preparations for the final battle, not knowing that their desperate message had just changed the course of galactic history. In 30 rotations, the Vorthak would come. The final coalition would make their last stand. And somewhere in the distant darkness, on a world marked only as persistent, their message was about to be received by a species that had never learned the meaning of the word impossible. The message from across the galaxy arrived at the Deep Space Monitoring Station in Nevada at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Dr. Alex Morgan was the only one awake in the facility, nursing his fourth cup of coffee while running routine scans of the deep space frequencies. He had been doing this job for 12 years, listening to the cosmic background radiation and the occasional signal from human colonies in nearby star systems. He had never heard anything like this before. The signal was strong, much stronger than anything that should have been able to reach Earth from such a distance. More importantly, it was clearly artificial. The mathematical patterns embedded in the transmission were too complex and too organized to be natural phenomena. As Alex stared at his computer screen, watching the data scroll past, he felt his hands begin to shake. This was it. This was first contact with alien intelligence. Alex immediately called his supervisor, Dr. Rachel Kim, who arrived at the station within an hour. Together, they began the painstaking process of decoding the message. The aliens had been clever, using mathematical constants and star charts to create a universal language that any technological civilization should be able to understand. By noon, they had decoded enough to realize what they were dealing with. This was not a greeting or a peaceful introduction to galactic civilization. This was a desperate cry for help from beings who were facing extinction. Dr. Kim made the call to Washington. Within 6 hours, every major government on Earth knew about the alien message. The news sent shockwaves through the halls of power around the world. Humanity was not alone in the universe, but their first contact was with a civilization that was dying. President Lisa Carter convened an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council. The world's leaders gathered in New York to discuss something that had never been more than science fiction just days before. In the meeting room, Dr. Morgan presented his translation of the alien message to the assembled representatives. They call themselves the Final Coalition, he explained, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was saying. They are an alliance of multiple alien species fighting against something called the Vorthak Empire. According to their message, this empire has been conquering the galaxy for over 1,000 years. The Chinese representative leaned forward. How far away are they? Approximately 50,000 light-years, Dr. Morgan replied. In our galactic terms, they are on the opposite side of the galaxy from Earth. The Russian delegate shook his head. That distance is impossible to cross. Even our fastest ships would take millions of years to reach them. That may be true, President Carter said quietly. But the question we face is not whether we can help them. The question is whether we should try. The debate that followed was intense, but brief. Some argued for caution, suggesting that Earth should remain hidden rather than risk drawing the attention of a galaxy-conquering empire. Others pointed out that if the Vorthak were truly as powerful as the message suggested, they would eventually find Earth anyway. But the argument that won the day came from an unexpected source. Ambassador Chen Wei from China, who had lost his family in the Third World War, stood up and spoke with quiet intensity. My friends, he said, we have spent the last century learning to work together as one human species. We have overcome our differences and built a world where war between nations is almost unthinkable. We did this because we learned that all human life has value, that we are stronger together than apart. He paused, looking around the room at the faces of his colleagues. Now, we discover that life exists beyond our world, and that life is crying out for help. If we turn our backs on them, what does that say about everything we have learned? What does that say about who we are as a species? The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. Humanity would attempt to help the alien coalition, no matter how impossible the task might seem. Admiral Jake Sullivan was called to Washington the next day. The former Navy SEAL had spent the last decade commanding Earth's small but growing space fleet, defending human colonies from pirates and asteroid impacts. He had never imagined he would be asked to lead humanity's first interstellar war. The situation is this, President Carter explained to him in the Oval Office. We have maybe 30 days before these aliens face their final battle. We need to get a fleet across 50,000 light-years of space in less than a month. Sullivan studied the star charts that Dr. Morgan had prepared. Ma'am, with all due respect, that's impossible. Our fastest ships can barely manage short range, faster than light travel. A journey like this should take centuries. Dr. Morgan leaned forward excitedly. That's where you're wrong, Admiral. The alien message contained more than just a cry for help. It contained the mathematical principles behind their faster-than-light communication system. Our scientists have been studying it around the clock. And we think we can reverse engineer it. Not just for communication, but for travel. If we're right, we can build a drive system that folds space-time itself, allowing us to cross vast distances almost instantly. Sullivan was quiet for a long moment, processing what he had just heard. You're talking about technology that's purely theoretical. We've never built anything like this before. No, Dr. Morgan admitted, but we've never had alien mathematics to work from before either. The principles are sound. We just need to scale them up and adapt them to our ships. President Carter looked at both men seriously. Admiral, I need you to tell me honestly, is this mission possible? Sullivan had been a military man his entire adult life. He had led troops into impossible situations and brought them home alive. He had learned to evaluate risks and make hard decisions under pressure. But this was unlike anything he had ever faced. If you had asked me yesterday, I would have said no, he said finally. But these aliens managed to send us a message across 50,000 light years. If they can do that, maybe we can figure out how to travel the same distance. The next few weeks saw the most intense technological development in human history. Scientists and engineers from every nation worked together, sharing knowledge and resources without regard for national boundaries. The alien mathematics provided the theoretical foundation, but human ingenuity was needed to turn theory into reality. Dr. Morgan worked with teams of physicists to understand the quantum principles behind the alien communication system. Captain Nina Rodriguez, Earth's most experienced space pilot, worked with engineers to design ships that could handle the stresses of folding space-time. Commander Pete Jackson assembled and trained a force of Marines who would be ready for anything they might encounter on the other side of the galaxy. The breakthrough came on day 23. Dr. Morgan's team successfully tested a small-scale version of what they called the quantum bridge drive. A probe ship disappeared from Earth's solar system and reappeared near the moon, having covered the distance instantly. It works, Dr. Morgan told the assembled leaders over video conference. We can cross the galaxy. The global defense fleet was transformed overnight. Every available ship was retrofitted with the new drive system. Weapons were upgraded, medical supplies were loaded, and something else was added that no alien species had ever seen before. Earth's biologists had prepared massive seed banks containing samples of every form of life from Earth, from bacteria to redwood trees. If we're going to help rebuild a galaxy, Dr. Morgan had argued, we should bring the gift of Earth's diversity with us. 200 ships assembled in Earth orbit, more than half of humanity's entire space fleet. They were not the largest or most powerful ships in the galaxy, but they carried something that the galaxy had never seen before. They carried human determination, human creativity, and human refusal to accept that any situation was truly hopeless. As the fleet prepared for the jump across the galaxy, Dr. Morgan sent a final message toward the distant coalition. The message was simple but carried the weight of human history behind it. Final coalition, this is Earth. We received your message. Help is coming. Hold on. The response came back weak and fading, transmitted across impossible distances by beings who were barely clinging to life. Earth? We do not know this word. But if you are warriors, please hurry. We have perhaps 10 rotations left before the end. Admiral Sullivan stood on the bridge of the flagship UES Terra's Hope, looking out at the fleet assembled around him. These were not professional soldiers, most of them. They were volunteers, people who had heard about the alien message and decided that they could not stand by while thinking beings faced extinction. All ships, this is Admiral Sullivan, he broadcast to the fleet. Today we don't just defend our world, We defend the right of all thinking beings to exist free. Remember, we're not going as conquerors, we're going as liberators. Let's bring them hope. The quantum drives powered up, bending space-time around the human fleet. For a moment, 200 ships hung suspended between dimensions, between the small blue world that had given them birth and the distant galaxy that needed their help. Then they were gone, racing across the void toward a battle that would determine the fate of all free life in the galaxy. Behind them, Earth continued its quiet orbit around the sun, unaware that its children had just begun the greatest adventure in human history. The human fleet emerged from quantum space just as the Vorthak began their final assault on Kepler Prime. Space around the Coalition's last stronghold was filled with death and fire. Massive biomechanical ships, each one the size of a city, moved through the darkness like predators hunting wounded prey. Smaller Vorthak vessels darted between the Coalition's defense platforms, their organic weapons tearing through metal and energy shields as if they were paper. Admiral Jake Sullivan stood on the bridge of Terra's Hope, watching the tactical display with growing horror. The alien ships were unlike anything in human military databases. They moved like living things, their hulls pulsing with veins of light, their weapons growing and adapting in real time. Some looked like giant insects made of metal and flesh, while others resembled sea creatures with tentacles that could stretch across kilometers of space. "My God," whispered Captain Nina Rodriguez, her hands gripping the pilot controls. "How many ships do they have?" "Sensors show over 3,000 Vorthak vessels," reported Lieutenant Danny Park from the navigation station. "The Coalition fleet has maybe 400 ships still fighting." Sullivan watched as a Coalition cruiser exploded under concentrated fire from 5 Vorthak attackers. The alien ships immediately swarmed over the wreckage, their biomechanical hulls absorbing the metal and energy for their own use. It was like watching sharks feed on a wounded whale. On Kepler Prime, Commander Vex Korath was fighting a losing battle from the command center. His tactical screens showed Vorthak forces breaking through the outer defense lines one by one. Soon they would reach the station itself, and the last free beings in the galaxy would join the countless billions who had died before them. "Sir," called out one of his communications officers, a young Nereid named Finn Wavecrest, "I'm picking up new contacts on the edge of the system. 200 vessels, unknown configuration." Korath looked at the display with tired eyes. Probably more Vorthak reinforcements. How much worse can this day become? But as he watched the new ships move into formation, something seemed different. These vessels were smaller than Vorthak dreadnoughts, but they moved with a precision and purpose that was completely unlike the organic chaos of the Empire's fleets. More importantly, they were heading straight for the Vorthak formation. "Sir," Finn said, his voice rising with excitement, "the new ships are opening fire on the Vorthak fleet." Across the battlefield, the human fleet struck like lightning. Terra's Hope led the charge, her weapon systems targeting the largest Vorthak command ship with surgical precision. The alien vessel was 10 times larger than the human flagship, but Captain Rodriguez did not try to match its firepower. Instead, she used Earth's stealth technology to slip past its sensors and strike at weak points that human analysis had identified. "All ships, this is Admiral Sullivan," he broadcast to the fleet. "Remember your training. We're not trying to outfight them ship to ship. We're going to outthink them." The human attack was unlike anything the Vorthak had encountered in 1,000 years of conquest. Instead of the formal fleet battles they expected, the humans employed hit-and-run tactics, misdirection, and strategies that seemed to change minute by minute. One moment they would mass their forces for a concentrated assault. The next they would scatter like leaves in the wind, only to reappear attacking from completely different angles. Commander Pete Jackson led the first Marine boarding, action against a Vorthak bioship. His team used human demolition charges to breach the organic hull, then fought their way through corridors that pulsed like the inside of a living creature. The Vorthak defenders were 7 feet tall with 4 arms and armor that seemed to be part of their bodies, but they fought with predictable tactics that human Marines had trained to counter. "These bugs don't know how to adapt," Jackson reported over the radio as his team secured the ship's command center. "They keep using the same attack patterns even when they're not working." Dr. Alex Morgan was aboard one of the support ships, frantically working to establish communication with the coalition forces. When he finally broke through their communication protocols, his first words became legendary across the galaxy. "Final coalition, this is Dr. Alex Morgan of the human fleet. We received your message. We're here to help." On Kepler Prime, Commander Korath stared at his communication screen in disbelief. The translator was working perfectly, but the words made no sense. "Humans? We do not know this species. What star system do you come from?" "We come from a world called Earth, 50,000 light-years from here," Dr. Morgan replied. "You sent a message asking for help. We came as fast as we could." The effect on coalition morale was immediate and electric. Across the fleet, alien crews who had been preparing to die suddenly found themselves fighting with renewed energy. The mysterious humans had crossed impossible distances to stand beside them in their darkest hour. But the Vorthak were not easily confused. Their hive-mind intelligence began analyzing the human attack patterns, looking for weaknesses to exploit. What they found frustrated them beyond measure. Human tactics made no sense according to their calculations. The humans would sacrifice valuable ships to save damaged coalition vessels, something no rational species should do. They would retreat from winning battles to help with evacuations, abandoning strategic advantages for no logical reason. Captain Rodriguez demonstrated this perfectly when she led Terra's Hope in a desperate rescue of a coalition transport ship filled with civilian refugees. The transport was surrounded by 3 Vorthak cruisers and had no chance of escape. By all military logic, the humans should have left it to die rather than risk their flagship. Instead, Rodriguez dove her ship directly into the enemy formation, using Terra's Hope as bait to draw the Vorthak ships away from the transport. Her ship took heavy damage, but the civilians escaped. As she limped away from the battle, she broadcast a message on all frequencies that the Vorthak could not understand. "This is Captain Rodriguez to all coalition ships. No one gets left behind." That's a promise. The confused Vorthak tried to adapt their tactics to counter human unpredictability, but they faced an impossible problem. How do you plan for enemies who refuse to follow any plan? The humans seemed to make up their strategies as they went along, changing tactics so quickly that the Vorthak hive mind could not keep up. Admiral Thane Deepcurrent watched the battle from his command ship with growing amazement. His people were master tacticians who had studied warfare for thousands of years, but these humans fought like nothing he had ever seen. They broke every rule of space combat, yet somehow they were winning. "How are they doing this?" he asked his tactical officer, a Lumina named Brightstar. "I do not know, Admiral," Brightstar replied, her energy form flickering with confusion. "Their attack patterns have no mathematical basis. They should not work, yet the Vorthak cannot counter them." The battle raged for 6 hours, but for the first time in coalition history, the Vorthak fleet began to retreat. The Empire's forces had expected an easy victory against the last free worlds, but instead they found themselves facing an enemy they could not predict or understand. As the surviving Vorthak ships fled into hyperspace, leaving behind dozens of wrecked vessels, Admiral Sullivan broadcast to all coalition forces. His words were simple but carried the weight of human determination. "Final coalition, this is Admiral Sullivan of the human fleet. We didn't come here to die with you. We came here to win, and this is just the beginning." Commander Korath felt something he had not experienced in years as he listened to the human admiral's words. It was hope, fragile and new, but stronger than anything he had felt since the war began. Dr. Lisa Brightmoon floated in her laboratory, staring at the sensor readings from the battle. The humans had not just fought the Vorthak. They had made them retreat. In 1,000 years of conquest, no one had ever made the Empire's forces withdraw from a battle they expected to win. "Who are these humans?" she whispered to herself, watching as the strange ships from Earth moved to help with rescue operations. As coalition medical ships began treating wounded from both fleets, something unprecedented happened. Human medics worked alongside alien doctors, sharing medical knowledge and techniques that neither species had seen before. Commander Jackson's Marines helped evacuate damaged coalition ships, carrying wounded Zephyrian warriors and injured Nereid sailors to safety without regard for species or origin. The battle was over, but everyone knew it was only the beginning. The Vorthak would return with larger fleets and new strategies. The planet killer Omega was still being built, still preparing to destroy entire star systems. But something had changed in the galaxy that day. The Coalition was no longer alone, no longer fighting a hopeless battle against impossible odds. They had allies now, strange beings from a distant world who refused to accept that any situation was truly hopeless. As the combined fleets regrouped, in the shadow of Kepler Prime, Dr. Morgan worked to establish better communication with the Coalition leaders. There was so much to learn, so much to understand about each other. But one thing was already clear to everyone who had witnessed the battle. The humans had not just brought ships and weapons to the fight. They had brought something the galaxy had forgotten existed. 3 days after the battle, the combined human and Coalition fleets gathered at the hidden base in the nebula of Forgotten Suns. The ancient space station had been built thousands of years ago by a race that was now extinct, its massive docking, bays carved from a dead asteroid that drifted in the purple clouds of cosmic dust. For the first time since the war began, Coalition leaders felt safe enough to meet face to face with their mysterious new allies. Dr. Alex Morgan walked through the station's corridors with wonder, seeing dozens of alien species working together. Tall Zephyrians with their green scales moved alongside floating lumina, whose bodies glowed with soft light. Blue-skinned Nereid coordinated supply shipments while insectoid beings from the Kresh colonies repaired damaged weapons. It was like something from humanity's wildest science fiction dreams, but it was real. In the main conference room, Admiral Jake Sullivan sat across from Commander Vex Korath, Admiral Thane Deepcurrent, and Dr. Lysa Brightmoon. The translation devices worked perfectly now, allowing real conversation between species that had never known each other existed. "Your tactics in the last battle," Commander Korath said, his yellow eyes studying Sullivan carefully. "They make no sense by any military standard we know. Yet they worked. How is this possible?" Sullivan smiled, an expression that seemed to puzzle the alien commander. "That's because you've been fighting the same enemy for so long, you've started thinking like them. The Vorthak expect predictable strategies because that's all they've ever faced. We don't follow their rules because we don't know what their rules are." Dr. Brightmoon's energy form flickered with curiosity. "But surely you must have some system, some method for your combat decisions." "We do," Captain Nina Rodriguez said, joining the conversation. "We call it thinking on our feet. Human pilots train for years to make quick decisions in changing situations. We don't follow battle plans word for word. We adapt them as we go." Admiral Deepcurrent's tentacles moved, in the gesture his people used when they were trying to understand something difficult. "This is unusual. Most species develop specialized roles over thousands of years. The Zephyrians become warriors. The Lumina become scientists. My people become coordinators. But you humans seem to do everything. That's because we're still young," Dr. Morgan explained. "We haven't had time to specialize. A human engineer might become a fighter pilot if needed. A scientist might lead troops into battle. A soldier might become a diplomat. We're generalists." This conversation was happening all over the station as humans and Coalition members worked together. Commander Pete Jackson was training a mixed unit of alien and human Marines, teaching them what he called impossible mission tactics. His first lesson had become famous throughout the fleet. "The enemy says this cannot be done," he told his students, who included everything from 7-foot Zephyrian warriors to small, quick beings from the crystal worlds. "The situation is hopeless. The odds are against us. Perfect. Now we don't have to worry about doing things the right way. We can do them the human way." What Jackson meant was that humans had learned to see hopeless situations as opportunities rather than obstacles. When normal tactics wouldn't work, they would try something that seemed crazy. When the odds were against them, they would change the game entirely. Captain Rodriguez was having similar success training Coalition pilots. She had discovered that alien pilots were incredibly skilled, but followed rigid patterns that made them predictable. Human pilots, on the other hand, relied on intuition as much as training. Feel the battle, She told a group of Nereid pilots during a simulation exercise. Don't just react to what the enemy is doing now. Try to sense what they're going to do next. Trust your instincts. The Nereid were natural space navigators, but they had never been taught to trust feelings over calculations. When they tried Rodriguez's methods, their flying improved dramatically. They began anticipating enemy moves in ways that surprised even themselves, but the most important discoveries were happening in Dr. Morgan's communication center. Working with Dr. Brightmoon and scholars from a dozen species, he was learning about the galaxy's history and the true nature of the Vorthak threat. The Empire has been growing for over 1,000 years, Dr. Brightmoon explained, her energy form dimming with sadness. They convert entire worlds into biomechanical factories. Every planet they conquer becomes part of their war machine, Doctor. Morgan studied the star charts showing the Vorthak expansion. But they've never faced real resistance before, have they? Every species they've conquered fought them the same way. How else would one fight? Asked Professor Keenedge, a crystal, being whose body rang like music when he spoke. There are established methods of warfare, proven strategies that have worked for millions of years. Maybe that's the problem, Dr. Morgan said quietly. You've all been fighting a 1,000-year war using million-year-old strategies. The Vorthak have learned to counter everything you can do because you've been doing the same things for so long. This realization led to the most important breakthrough of the war. Working together, human and coalition scientists developed what they called chaos tactics, deliberately unpredictable strategies that even the people using them didn't fully understand until they were executed. The first test came when a Vorthak scout fleet was detected approaching one of the coalition's supply bases. Instead of defending the base with standard formations, Admiral Sullivan tried something that horrified the coalition commanders. He scattered his ships across the system in what looked like complete disorder, with no apparent plan or coordination. When the Vorthak arrived, they found what seemed to be easy prey. Isolated ships with no support, running in different directions, with no coordination. The enemy fleet moved in for quick kills, splitting up to chase down the scattered vessels. That was exactly what Sullivan had hoped for. The seemingly panicked human and coalition ships suddenly turned on their pursuers, coordinating attacks that came from directions the Vorthak had not expected. Ships that had appeared to be fleeing were actually moving into ambush positions. What had looked like chaos was actually a complex trap. The entire scout fleet was destroyed without a single coalition casualty. Impossible, Admiral Deepcurrent whispered as he watched the battle recordings. How did you coordinate such a complex operation without any apparent communication? We did communicate, Sullivan explained, but not in ways the Vorthak could detect or understand. We used music, light patterns, even flying formations that looked random but carried information. The enemy monitored our standard communication channels and heard nothing. Commander Korath felt something he had not experienced in decades as he studied the human methods. It was excitement, the joy of learning something completely new. You fight like artists, he said with wonder. Not like soldiers, but like artists creating something beautiful from chaos. As the weeks passed, the alliance between humans and coalition forces grew stronger. They shared more than just military tactics. Human medical teams introduced concepts like trauma counseling to help aliens who had been fighting a hopeless war for generations. Coalition scientists shared advanced technologies that helped humans improve their ships and weapons. But the most important exchange was philosophical. The coalition species had become rigid and specialized over millions of years of evolution. They had forgotten how to adapt, how to change, how to hope for something better than what they had. Humans were different. They were young, flexible, and absolutely refused to accept that any situation was permanent. They brought something to the galaxy that had been missing for so long that most species had forgotten it existed. The unshakable belief that tomorrow could be better than today. Dr. Brightmoon spent hours talking with Dr. Morgan about human history, fascinated by how a species could survive wars, disasters, and setbacks that should have destroyed them. Your people have faced extinction many times, she observed. Yet you never surrendered. That's because we're too stubborn to know when. We're beaten, Dr. Morgan replied with a smile, and too curious to stop trying new things. As intelligence reports came in about the Vorthak preparing for a massive counterattack, Admiral Sullivan called a meeting of all fleet commanders. The news was grim. The enemy was massing the largest fleet in galactic history, centered around the nearly completed planet killer Omega. They're going to throw everything they have at us, Sullivan told the assembled leaders. Every ship, every weapon, every resource. This will be the final battle. The coalition commanders felt the familiar weight of despair settling on them. Even with human help, they were still outnumbered 10-1. The planet killer alone could destroy entire fleets with a single shot. But Admiral Sullivan stood up, with the expression that his alien allies were beginning to recognize. It was the look humans got when they were about to do something that seemed impossible. Good, he said simply. If they're putting everything in one place, that means we only have to beat them once. And beating impossible odds is what humans do best. Commander Korath felt his scales shifting from their usual green to the bright gold color that Zephyrians showed when they felt hope. For the first time since the war began, he believed they might actually win. The final battle began at the edge of the Vorthak home system, where the planet killer Omega hung in space like a mechanical moon of death. The massive weapon was nearly complete, its biomechanical surface pulsing with veins of dark energy. Around it floated the largest fleet in galactic history, over 10,000 Vorthak ships arranged in perfect formations that stretched across millions of kilometers of space. Admiral Jake Sullivan stood on the bridge of Terra's Hope, watching the enemy fleet through the view screen. Behind him, the combined human and coalition forces looked pitifully small by comparison. 400 ships against 10,000 seemed like suicide, but Sullivan had learned something important about the Vorthak during their battles together. Two. Enemy's greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. Dr. Morgan, Sullivan called to the communication station. Are you ready with the special transmission? Dr. Alex Morgan nodded, his hands moving over controls that had been modified with both human and alien technology. The quantum resonance transmitter is ready, Admiral, but I still think this plan is completely insane. That's what makes it perfect, Sullivan replied with a grin. The Vorthak hive mind cannot understand insanity. They will analyze our actions looking for logical strategy, and they will find none because there isn't any. The plan that Sullivan and Dr. Morgan had developed was based on something that no other species in the galaxy had ever attempted. They were going to lie to the Vorthak, not with words but with actions. They would make their fleet appear to suffer. A complete command breakdown, with ships turning on each other in apparent panic and confusion. Commander Pete Jackson was aboard one of the human assault ships, preparing for the most dangerous part of the mission. His job was to lead a boarding team onto the planet killer Omega itself, while the enemy was distracted by the fake battle in space. It was almost certainly a suicide mission, but Jackson had volunteered immediately when Sullivan explained the ETO plan. Remember, Jackson told his mixed team of human Marines and coalition warriors, we don't need to destroy this thing completely. We just need to disrupt its coordination systems long enough for the fleet to do their job. Captain Nina Rodriguez was preparing for her own impossible task. Terra's Hope would pretend to be a damaged command ship, broadcasting fake surrender signals while actually coordinating the real attack. She knew it was likely a one-way mission, but her last transmission to Admiral Sullivan showed no fear. Tell Earth we didn't just find aliens today, she said over the private channel. We found family worth dying for. As the human and coalition fleet approached the Vorthak formation, Sullivan gave the order that began the strangest battle in galactic history. All ships, begin Operation Chaos. Make it look good. What followed was a performance that would have impressed any theater director. Human and coalition ships began firing on each other, but their weapons were set to minimum power and aimed at non-critical systems. Ships spun out of control in apparently crippling damage, broadcasting distress calls and panic messages. Command vessels sent contradictory orders while escort ships seemed to rebel against their officers. To the watching Vorthak, it looked like the enemy fleet was tearing itself apart through incompetence and fear. The rigid hive mind intelligence could not conceive of beings deliberately weakening themselves as part of a strategy. They saw only confusion and collapse. Commander Vex Korath was aboard one of the ships playing dead, his vessel drifting apparently, powerless while actually preparing for the real attack. As he watched Vorthak scouts move in to investigate the wreckage, he felt something he had never experienced before. He was enjoying battle again, not because of the killing, but because of the cleverness. These humans have taught us how to fight, with our minds as well as our weapons, he told his crew over the internal communication system. Today we do not just defeat the Vorthak, we prove that intelligence is stronger than brute force. The Vorthak fleet moved forward in their standard formation, expecting to easily destroy the apparently helpless enemy vessels. Their scouts reported that the coalition fleet was in complete disarray, with ships abandoning formation and even attacking each other. It should have been a simple cleanup operation. That was exactly what Sullivan had hoped for. Now, he whispered into his communication device. Across the battlefield, ships that had appeared crippled suddenly revealed themselves as fully operational. Coalition vessels emerged from behind asteroids where they had been hiding with engines, cold. The fake distress signals were replaced by coordinated attack orders as the real battle began. But the space battle was only a diversion. The real attack was happening inside the planet killer Omega itself. Commander Jackson and his team had used the confusion to infiltrate the massive weapon through a maintenance port that Coalition intelligence had identified. They fought their way through corridors that pulsed like living tissue, past Vorthak defenders who were confused by the unexpected invasion. Dr. Morgan had discovered something crucial about the planet killer during his studies of Vorthak technology. The weapon required perfect coordination between millions of biomechanical components. If even a small part of its control system was disrupted, the entire weapon would become unstable. Jackson's team reached the central coordination chamber, just as the space battle reached its peak. The room was filled with organic computers that looked like giant brains connected by pulsing cables. Vorthak technicians worked at control stations, their forearms moving in perfect synchronization as they prepared to fire the ultimate weapon. Plant the charges, Jackson ordered his team. We only get one shot at this. As his Marines set explosive devices around the organic computers, Jackson noticed something that Dr. Morgan would have found fascinating. The Vorthak technicians continued working, even as human soldiers placed bombs right next to them. They could not break their programming to deal with the unexpected situation, but the most important part of the plan was still to come. Dr. Morgan had prepared a special transmission, something that no one had ever attempted before. Using the same quantum resonance technology that had brought humans across the galaxy, he was going to broadcast a message directly into the Vorthak hive mind network. The message was simple but devastating to their rigid thinking. Every being has the right to choose their own path. Even you. As Dr. Morgan activated the transmission, something unprecedented happened in Vorthak history. Individual members of the hive mind began to question their orders. The concept of personal choice, of individual freedom, spread through their collective consciousness like a virus. On the planet killer Omega, Vorthak technicians suddenly stopped working as they contemplated this new idea. Some refused to fire on disabled ships. Others abandoned their post to think about what it might mean to make their own decisions. The massive weapon, requiring perfect coordination to function, began to malfunction as its operators experienced individual thought for the first time in their species' history. Power fluctuations ran through its biomechanical systems as the collective mind that controlled it began to fragment into individual consciousnesses. Jackson's explosives went off at exactly the right moment, disrupting the coordination systems, just as the weapon tried to fire. Instead of destroying the coalition fleet, the planet killer Omega turned its energy inward, its own power source becoming unstable. In space, the Vorthak fleet found itself facing the same crisis. Ships that had moved in perfect formation for 1,000 years suddenly had crews questioning their orders. Some vessels stopped fighting entirely as their crews tried to understand what individual choice might mean. Admiral Sullivan watched in amazement as the enemy fleet began to collapse not from weapons fire, But from philosophical revolution, Dr. Morgan, he called out, I think your message is working a little too well. The planet killer Omega exploded in a flash of light that could be seen across the star system. The destruction of their ultimate weapon sent shockwaves through the Vorthak fleet. But these were not just physical shockwaves. They were psychological ones. For the first time in their history, individual Vorthak began making personal decisions. Many chose to stop fighting. Others decided to help rescue crews from damaged ships. Some even sent messages to the Coalition fleet, asking to learn more about this concept called freedom. The battle ended not with the destruction of the Vorthak Empire, but with its transformation. The rigid hive mind that had conquered half the galaxy began to evolve into something new, a society of individuals learning to make their own choices. Admiral Sullivan's final log entry, transmitted back to Earth, became part of human history. We came to save them, but they saved us too. We were a young species alone in the dark. Now we are part of something greater, a galaxy where every voice matters, where every being has the right to dream their own dreams. 5 years later, the former Coalition worlds had become the Galactic Federation of Free Worlds. Humans served not as leaders but as teachers, helping other species learn the difficult art of individual freedom while working together for common goals. Dr. Morgan established the first interspecies university on New Kepler, where beings from dozens of worlds learned not just science and technology, but the human concepts of hope, creativity, and the belief that impossible just meant